Welcome to Season 4 of the Paleo Post Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things human evolution, ancient art, and the stories that connect us all. I'm Seth Choggy, joined by my fantastic co-hosts Genevieve von Petzinger and Dr. George Nash. This season, we're taking you on a journey across continents and millennia, from the mysteries of rock art to the exciting prospects of my upcoming move to Portugal. We'll be chatting with some incredible guests, diving deep into the art and culture of our ancestors, and exploring the cutting edge of paleoanthropology. So buckle up for this season full of discovery, fresh perspectives, and a few surprises along the way. Hit the subscribe button and join us as we uncover the secrets of our shared past and chart new paths for the future. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. It is George, are we on the 4th episode of the Paleo Post Podcast, I believe?
It's number 4.
Yep, here we are again, and we have a very special guest, Mr. Peter Robinson, and we are so pleased to have him. George, I'm going to hand it over to you because I know you are just so thrilled and just waiting to take on this lovely conversation that we have been unfortunately having to put off here and there due to the unforeseen circumstances, but we're here now, and that's what matters. So, George, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Seth. I dare say both Peter and myself are suffering from they call it the extreme heat. It's reached 31 degrees here today, Peter. I don't know what it's like with you.
Same.
Oh, right, okay, right. And for the first time, I live in an ancient house, and the one beautiful thing about this is it keeps a constant temperature, so it can be very, very hot outside, but it's very, very pleasant inside. But I'm just starting to feel the humidity in the atmosphere, in the air, and so I'm waiting for the sun to go down, and I'm going to go for a beer. Simple as that.
Sounds lovely.
I've known Peter for many years now, and Peter is one of the people that run the Bradshaw Foundation. And for viewers and listeners who doesn't know what the Bradshaw Foundation is, I'll ask Peter that question in a minute. But basically, you need a repository when you're looking at world rock art or the world of rock art, and this is it basically. And if any of you have surfed the net looking for a particular site, it's more than likely that the Bradshaw Foundation will come up, and it's Peter and a guy called Ben Dickens. Ben Dickens is the techie guy, and they've put together a remarkable a useful tool for anybody researching world rock art or rock art anywhere within the world. So, Peter, tell me about the Bradshaw Foundation. What's it all about?
Well, first of all, Ben Dickens is the director of art and design as well as the technical wizard. So, but the Bradshaw Foundation is basically a platform for debate. It's an online learning resource for all matters relating to rock art, and so we encourage scientific debate concerning hypotheses and theories, existing and new ones. We have no agenda, and we were formed by about 30 years ago by a convergence of artists and scientists. A small handful of people were in Australia, northwestern Australia, looking at the rock art in the Kimberley, and they were sort of basically blown away by the sophistication of the rock art and the mystery behind it. So, and I think this raises an important point. There are many avenues into rock art, into prehistoric rock art. There's archaeology, there's anthropology, ethnography, geography, geology, etc. But there's also art, and so having the artists on board was a pivotal driving force in terms of getting the attention of the scientists to look at what they were saying and raising questions about who did it and when and why. So So that's where the the Bradshaw Foundation came from, and we've just got bigger and bigger with the through the website and working with people like yourself, George, who are experts in the field. So from there, we've just, like I say, just grown and grown. And so I am not a scientist myself. I'm an artist, but that is really that always reminds me every day not to lose sight of our roots. Our roots into rock art are through the art, but we hold hands with the scientists.
And in many respects, does your day job, being an artist, do you find there's much of a crossover between what you do and how you think in a conceptual way with what might be going on, say, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30,000 years ago?
Well, there is. I mean, that's a big question because actually, I was commissioned by the British Museum in London to when they had an exhibition about the portable art, the so-called Venus figurines a few years ago, and I was commissioned to do three sculptures. I hate the word replica, but they wanted something to have in the shop for people after the exhibition. So I worked on three pieces: the Lesbugue figurine, the Vogelherd horse, and the Lion Man. And I thought it would just be a pretty straightforward task, but actually, once I was sitting down in the studio and holding the clay in my hands to work out what was going on with the original piece, I began to have a pretty phenomenal moment, a liminal moment, I suppose, where I was connecting with the original artist. Now, this is not science at all. It's a I must emphasize that. But as an artist, when replicating something from many thousands of years ago, there is a direct line to that from person to person, and so it sort of gave me an insight into the how and the why. And like I said, it wasn't a scientific moment, but it was an incredible artistic moment. So my life, to finally answer your question, George, there is a great crossover for an artist and a director of the Bradshaw Foundation, and I'm privileged to be in that position at the moment.
Right. Okay. So, so what you were looking at, you were trying. Did you say that, or am I putting words into your mouth? Were you trying to think about the mindset of an artist of 25,000 years ago, for example, and to think why he or she, probably a she, I would like to think it was a she, was producing figurines, for example, or or are you trying to put your stamp of influence onto the art that you were putting together, with Peter Robinson doing the art rather than the
No,
concept?
it was the
Right.
former. It was the former. I thought it would just be a case of copying pictures of the original work of art, but actually, no, you are unlocking the mind of the original artist, and that was a total delight and privilege to do so. And I'm not the only person to do that. There are many people who have worked on prehistoric art and both paintings and sculptures to get that tingle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the one thing I have, coming from an archaeological point of view, is that we are forever recording, and we've done some fantastic recording, fantastic tracings, photography. We use all the modern technology from the toolbox to create, or replicate the art. But as an archaeologist, do I actually understand what is going on? And that's the problem I have, because I think with an archaeological mindset rather than the mindset of an artist.
Well, I bet you don't, George, because I bet you recognize that it's a shared human experience. When you're excavating a hearth, you don't just look at what's on the ground. You imagine sitting around that fire with
Yes.
those people, or
Yeah.
you imagine going into the cave going to a cave in Andalusia, you seeing the art, you don't just look up at the art. You look for the original artist whose spirit is still in that cave. So I think you're doing yourself down, actually, George. You're not a pure scientist in that way. You have soul as well.
I was looking at archaeologists per se. I mean, I suppose one of the things that has put a tingle down my spine is seeing, well, actually going into a cave or even onto an open air rock art site and seeing that artistic endeavor from the word go. So my next question would be, and this is a really important question, something which I have to wrestle with all the time: are we looking at art, or are we looking at something else? And I mean, I tend to be uncomfortable with using the term rock art, for example, and I think we've had this discussion before. Yeah, are we looking at something which is like a visual communication system? Are we looking at a way of communicating a message, a narrative to an audience, for example? And that's basically what my whole research, raison d'etre, was all about, 20, 30 years ago. And so the question I'll be asking you: are we looking at art? That's a simple question.
It's such a wonderful question. I mean, if you go back right the way back to lithics and axe heads, there was a time when an axe head became more than an axe head. It became more than functional. It became a thing of beauty.
Yeah,
So
I
what's
agree.
going on there? So how did that come into the equation? I'm sure you've all read Robert McFarlane's book, Underland. He he talks about Chauvet and the art of Chauvet, and he quotes from John Berger. I'm going to read that quote. Art is born like a foal that can walk straight away. The talent to make art accompanies the need for that art. They arrive together. So something was going on in our hardwired brain to need art and to be able to create art. I agree with you. Rock art, I think, is a misnomer. I think it's just art. But the transition from where did the transition from a functional tool to a tool of beauty to a painting of beauty to a symbol of mystery? Where did that come from? That's what fascinates me as the director of the Bradshaw Foundation. And so whilst we provide robust science for our scholars on the site, we never forget that it all comes from the art itself, and something is going on in the brain to do that, and at a time when let's not forget, this was a dangerous time. It was a dangerous environment. Another book that I have enjoyed by Derek Hodgson, The Roots of Visual Depiction in Art. He's saying identifying animals was one of the key factors that led to the advancement of the human system, but it was a form of high vigilance that favored survival. Extinction awaited any primate who regarded a plant or an animal as a thing of beauty rather than a potential source of food or threat. So at this dangerous time, how did we have time to create things of beauty and mystery? That is, I find, fascinating.
This is quite an uncanny conversation we're having, because I spoke to Seth about a week ago. No, Seth, about the idea about when we start to think about lithics being a work of art. I mean, if you think about some of the stuff that you're seeing made by archaic humans, some of these hand axes, for example, they all have symmetry. They're all ergonomic. They are following a pattern throughout their world to produce remarkable pieces of engineering in many respects.
Yeah.
And in some respects, you can regard some of the work that they're producing as artistic endeavor. And this artistic endeavor is going way beyond modern humans, going way beyond Neanderthal, and it's going right into the early stages of human development. So there seems to be a need, an imperative need in my view, for whatever it's worth, of producing something which is aesthetically beautiful. And
Yeah.
I think that's we're seeing that with the lithics, and that could be actually be one of the triggers to transfer that engineering skill, that ergonomic skill, onto a cave wall or producing a portable artifact. And if that's the case, then we are looking back maybe 700,000, maybe a million years ago when this material is being produced.
I agree. I know it's not, and so that neatly leads us into another little question, George, about is it a human endeavor? It's not, is it?
It's
You're
not.
saying it's
I
not
think
exclusively a human endeavor.
Mm.
So should we talk about Neanderthals?
Well, I think that's an interesting point because again, I'm going back to my undergraduate days when I was quite clearly bombarded by the professors at the time, and quite rightly so, because we didn't have the evidence that
Yeah.
Neanderthals were there purely as a functional creature to
Yeah.
hunt, appropriate, and survive. Survive in quite harsh environments. If we think about the range of Neanderthals, we've got Euro-Asian Neanderthals, both west and east, ranging from the Iberian Peninsula into the British Isles, going further east into Eastern Europe, and then in Siberia. And we also now have evidence. We've always had evidence them being in Iraq, Iran, and
Yeah.
in the more warmer climes. But there was quite a range of different forms of Neanderthal, and we're starting to also realize, again, we knew about this 40 odd years ago when I was doing my undergraduate degree. However, the one thing that was missing was art. And we've now got it.
So when did that change?
My a question that I would be putting, which is a little bit sort of controversial, is that are we teaching modern humans, sorry, are Neanderthals teaching modern humans how to do art, how to think in an artistic way? And I think that could be the case. If you think about, we have different strands of modern humans coming out of Africa at a particular point, and my cutoff point, I think, is 50,000 years. So at 50,000 years, when we start to get contact, and I probably could even go back even further, because the work that Genevieve and myself have been doing in the Arabian Peninsula, for example, along with people who know about lithics and about dates of lithics and about that relationship with sites that have yielded art, it could be going back much, much further. But I think 50,000 is a good cutoff point, certainly in a European context, where I believe that the contact we have, yes, we're getting appropriation between modern humans and Neanderthals, but also more importantly, that there has to be a two-way process whereby modern humans are teaching Neanderthals and Neanderthals are teaching modern humans different skill sets within their day-to-day lives. And I think one of those skill sets is coming from Neanderthals to modern humans, and that is artistic endeavor. And it could
Okay.
be very, very simple artistic endeavor, which is production lithics, which we've already just talked about, but also the idea of the technology of getting hold of paint, or getting hold of pigments such as hematite, goethite, and applying that to the walls of caves. We've just started to get on into that revolution, that technical revolution in archaeology and anthropology, where we can now prove that there is artistic endeavor being made by Neanderthals, and it's occurring at a time which is very, very exciting. So, for example, a Monteluverso cave, which my colleague Hippolyto has been working on, well, Hippolyto and Sarah have been working on, and we've got clearly their handprints, which are Neanderthal. So
Okay.
that. Oh, sorry.
And so no, well said. And I would say that you said artistic influence, but it's also symbolic. I mean, the interaction between these two groups, the Neanderthal buried with flowers, I'm thinking, or
That's right. That sounds
and
archaic.
ochre, and so
Yeah,
that's a tradition. They that was the death of a family member was an important part of life. So
yeah.
I
Well,
don't know if you've read a new book called Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. She's it's a fictional book, and it's a really interesting one because it's part spy novel, part prehistory, and so it's not science, it's fiction. But she raises some really interesting points. One of the characters is an expert on the Neanderthal, and I've made a few bullet points here. Um, so in the book, the author says art was art the domain of the Homo sapien? No, it was just because of fancy cave paintings and ceilings in Lascaux. The Homo sapien is not the first to have a symbolic universe.
yeah,
Second one is Homo sapiens were pictures of, there are many pictures of hunting, you could argue. That was their symbolic life, killing, eating, rendering likenesses of animals, i.e., exerting power. Whereas the Neanderthal recorded what they saw in dreams, um, things that which did not exist in the world. The marks were abstract codes. So,
yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Right. Well, this is again, this is something which I'm actually dealing with at the moment, and again, I'll put in two little curveballs, and the
Yeah.
two curveballs are what I'm working on at the moment on cut marks, which are just simple gouged cupules, which are occurring in rock. They run from the Paleolithic right through to modern day. So we do have a handle on, in terms of historical cut marks, what they represent. We don't know what they represent, obviously, in prehistory. However, what is really interesting is that the area or the period I'm dealing with is, again, something which is much further forward than Neanderthals. But I'm dealing with the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, which is really artistic endeavor or symbolic endeavor, which is occurring in the third, fourth, and fifth millenniums BC. So we're dealing with the first agriculturalists. We're dealing with the succeeders, which is the Bronze Age people, which are again agriculturalists. We're dealing with the Iron Age. What is really interesting in Europe, in a European context, is we have cut marks which range from the Iberian Peninsula right through to southern Scandinavia. So a coastline, an Atlantic coastline, which is 3,200 kilometers long. Now, my question to myself is, do those cut marks in the Iberian Peninsula have the same meaning as the cut mark arrangements that you see in southern Scandinavia? I would like to say yes. I can't prove it. I like to say yes because they're all the same. There's single, multiple cut marks, which are arranged in particular ways. There are some patterns emerging, which are linear, crescent-like, etc., etc. So I like to think that. And then I think to myself, well, hang on a minute. If you've got the simple cut mark, what about the simple crescent or the simple cross? And what I'm trying to say is that the cut mark, like any other sign that we see within Paleolithic art, which could be Neanderthal, it could be modern humans, could we be looking at a generic symbol or a generic set of symbols which have universal meaning across a large landscape or a large area of territory? And do those have very, very complex meanings associated with it? So, for example, the Christian cross, for example, when we look at the Christian cross or the Islamic crescent, for example, that behind those two very simple symbols is a wealth. I mean, and a serious amount of meaning behind them. And I always remember, and again, I don't know if you've been there at all, Peter or Seth, but I went to visit the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is the Christian section of the old walled city of Jerusalem. And around the Holy Sepulchre are many thousands of simple crosses, which obviously have universal meaning. The people who were making those symbols were pilgrims who were devoutly Christian, and they were making their mark on a particular site, and that mark was the Christian cross. And you start to deconstruct the Christian cross, which we can't do in this episode of the Paleo Podcast, but it has a hell of a lot of symbolic meaning. Likewise, with the cut mark, I'm advocating the idea that this had universal meaning, and the meaning was probably very, very complex indeed, which we don't, and we can never ever get into the mindset. I'm sorry to say, of the agriculturists, the Neolithic and the Bronze Age agriculturists, to understand what those meanings are. However, their association is very, very interesting indeed, because what we've got is those cut marks being associated with landscape monuments, such as dolmens, such as burial ritual places, standing stones, stone circles, stone rows, and they occur on these monuments, but they also occur as boulders and on exposed rock outcropping. So clearly, there's a signature there whereby we have a relationship between the cut mark and burial ritual sites, i.e., death, burial, and ritual. Well, likewise, when we're looking at Neanderthal rock art and also rock art which has been made by modern humans, and we'll just give one example: the handprint, for example, which we've got at Multiverso Cave and other caves within the Iberian Peninsula and elsewhere, which has been clearly dated to Neanderthal. What are we looking at there? Are we looking at a very, very complex series of meanings associated with that, just that simple hand stencil or hand print that we see within caves? And I would say yes. It's very easy to record, but also to dismiss the intricate and complex nature of what that handprint represents. And I think this is where we have to use, as you've said quite correctly, we have to go beyond archaeology, bring in anthropology, bring in philosophy, sociology, geography, all those subjects within our toolbox to try and say something meaningful. But again, I would argue our big problem is it's trying to get into that mindset of Neanderthal artists and also early modern human artists to say something meaningful. That's our big problem. We can do all the science we want to, but it's difficult to try and get that interpretation.
Do you think it is a mindset? I like what you're saying, George, and I totally agree. What do you think it is a mindset thing? Do we have the same brains, the same psychology as prehistoric ancestors, or are we different creatures? Look at what's going on in this world today.
I'm going to whisper between me, you, and Seth. I don't want anybody to hear about this. Yes, I do. I do believe that we have the same brain capacity and the same needs, greeds, and aspirations that we as modern humans have apply to early modern humans in terms of territoriality, in terms of material culture, in terms of what we are expected to do as modern humans. But I can also apply that to Neanderthals as well, because I still believe that cutoff point, that 50,000 BC cutoff point, wherever you are within the Neanderthal range, be it Western Eurasia or Eastern Eurasia, that you have those same aspirations, those same needs, greed, and aspirations that you would expect in modern humans. Seth, what do you think?
I think that as you're saying, needs and aspirations arise from the geographical niches that we find ourselves in and the resources that are available. And we find our behaviors changing towards, how we gather those resources and find ourselves following food, finding what we need. So if we're in the same situation as a Neanderthal and we're finding ourselves in the same environment, eating the same things, facing the same weather, we could, on a certain level, perhaps share a view of the landscape, but I think it would be very hard to imagine that a Neanderthal and a modern human at any level would have the exact same view on things. And I think us versus modern humans 30,000 years ago, I agree also that we have the same needs and aspirations, as you say, and that's why so many of us today experience anxiety at such high levels and rates and depression and whatnot, because we're used to being so hyper vigilant, because we're used to being on looking out for resources constantly and dangers in the world and whatnot. And we are the same creature as we were 20, 30,000 years ago. We're just in different environments and we haven't adapted to those environments. So yes, in a long roundabout way of answering, I do think that our way of viewing the world at that time would have been similar.
I think I agree. I think here we are sort of talking on our laptops and relying on AI for information. But if the Wi-Fi goes down and the power is cut for 3 days, we would pretty quickly revert to the mindset of our prehistoric ancestors.
Yes.
So, but George, can I ask you, the cup marks or cupules you were talking about?
Yeah.
From what I've read, they are some people believe they're the earliest form of symbolic behavior and representation, and they're not just in Eurasia that you mentioned, but in the Americas and
Yeah.
Easter Island, for example, or Rapa Nui, and so, I mean, your universality hypothesis is surely kicking in there. There's no way that a sort of cultural communication can afford that to happen. It has to be a universal tendency.
I think you're right there, Peter. But what's really interesting is that in all examples, certainly in a European context, they are usually associated with death, burial, and ritual. You don't find them sort of randomly placed within a landscape without there being some form of burial monument in terms of a Neolithic and Bronze Age context occurring. So that's really interesting itself. What is also really interesting as well is that this very simple form of endeavor, symbolic endeavor, I won't use artistic endeavor, but symbolic endeavor, is usually hidden away as well. And I think what we're looking at, and the one thing I'm finding, I mean, I'm just doing a book at the moment on the prehistoric art of Wales, and I've had that really wonderful, fortunate thing with in a British context. I've had good weather. One, two, my legs haven't given away yet for climbing up mountains to look at these damn sites, and three, more importantly, that I'm starting to see patterns within the landscape, which is really, quite telling. And what I'm seeing is that I'm seeing a lot of burial monuments being associated with landscape monuments. Now, some of the viewers and listeners will be saying, "What the hell are you talking about, George?" Well, what I'm talking about is that you've got within, say, the Christian world, pilgrimages. So, for example, the famous pilgrimages of Santiago de Compostela, for example, in northern Spain, where you have to walk around about 1,000 kilometers to get from point A to point B, and point B being the cathedral in Santiago, which is the ultimate sort of pilgrimage. You've also got them in, obviously, Jerusalem, where you have these pilgrimages in the medieval period, where people were going from one point in the landscape to another, then to another, then to another, and then to another, to get to the final place they want to get to in terms of a Bronze Age. Is you've got these upland areas and also intermediate slope zones for the Neolithic and Bronze Age, but surrounding those sites, those burial ritual sites, are a series of standing stones, stone rows, stone circles, and I've called these actually guidance markers, whereby people just can't trudge into a ritual landscape; they have to go within it in a prescribed way. So, for example, if you're burying your uncle or your aunt or your brother or sister or mother or father in the Neolithic and Bronze Age, you have to carry that corpse in a particular way to get to the final resting place. And it's very much like, and there's something which probably not many people know about, but within medieval society, we have within that context the idea of corpse roads. So these are roads which are designated by the church for bodies to be buried in consecrated ground. So many villages and hamlets and small settlements didn't have a church and didn't have consummate consecrated ground. So you'd have to move the body from that unconsecrated area to a consecrated area in a prescribed way. And that prescribed way was through a corpse road. And I think what we've got going on in the Neolithic and Bronze Age is a similar sort of thing. And this is the reason why you have standing stones and other landscape monuments which assist in how people move through a ritualized, or no, they move from a landscape which is secular and public space into a landscape which is private space and ritualized. And rock art or cupules and other symbols on stone help people to guide through that landscape. And this is something which I've been seeing again and again and again in about 10 or 15 areas of Wales. I know this because I've just done it between February of this year and up until last week. I've just actually finished with the exception of maybe 5 or 6 sites. But they all seem to be doing the same sort of thing. They are guiding.
I think that's amazing, George. I think that we ought to do a new section on the Bradshaw site about this, because we went to Harris, the Isle of Harris, up in Western Scotland recently, and we saw the Callanee stones, and it's always made me wonder why these places of extreme effort and beauty, effort to make and beauty to behold, were created so far away. Was that a pilgrimage? Was that a way of really getting your attention to, if you're coming on this pilgrimage, you really want to be here. It's like a sort of, I don't know, a sort of trip to Mecca or something. It's a big deal. And so what you said, I totally agree with, and it makes sense.
Well, what we're seeing at Stonehenge, for example, let's just pick the classic prehistoric site in the British Isles, Stonehenge. We're starting first that a lot of the stone or a lot of the material to create Stonehenge didn't come from the locality. It's been brought in from places like Wales, for example, with the Preseliites, and we're also seeing from the DNA of some of the burials that people like Tim Darville, Mike Parker Pearson were excavating a few years ago. The DNA says they're coming from various parts of Europe. So it's very much a ritual draw for many communities. It's not just Wessex communities. It's it's a very, very important pilgrimage site.
Absolutely.
For many people. One of the things that I was really interested in, and this happened very early in my career, I had the most wonderful experience of excavating the entrance to a place called Lahergby, which is a Neolithic passage grave, which is quite early in its construction, but it's the second largest passage grave in Europe to Newgrange in Ireland. And Lahergby is a passage grave made of stone, and it is constructed in the eastern part of Jersey, a small island in the Channel Islands in the English Channel. And what we've got there is that we got a series of materials being used which don't come from the locality. So the main stone to construct Lahergby, which is a 53-meter diameter passage grave, circular passage grave, which currently stands at 12 meters high, but I've argued it was standing much, much higher, maybe up to 19, 20 meters high. So it would be a very prominent monument within the landscape. What we've got there in terms of the geology is dolomite, diorite being incorporated into the fabric. And basically, it's like that when you go walking and you start to build those little piles of stone, say that you are here. This is a similar sort of thing that's going on. It's people's legitimate right to use that monument, to venerate that monument, maybe even to bury their dead in that monument in the Neolithic period, by getting pieces of geology from your area and incorporating into the fabric of the monument. This is what we're seeing. We did some fabric analysis. A guy called Mark Patt did some fabric analysis when I was there, and came up with some fantastic ideas that this is not just a local massive monument to be constructed and to be looked at in awe, but also it's also a working monument where you're getting people coming in and placing their signatures through the geology, through their ownership, and bringing that to places like Lahogby. Not just Lahogby, but it's going on elsewhere around.
Or like Göbekli Tepe, would that be the same sort of thing?
Exactly the same sort of thing, except that we're doing something which is much earlier within the Neolithic or the Neolithic stroke Mesolithic sequence, because obviously there's some arguments there to suggest that it is part of the birth of agriculture within the Fertile Crescent of Turkey, Syria, and northern Palestine.
And therefore that moment, it wasn't a moment, but that transition, do you think there was a change in the art? Did you see to your artistic sensibility, see a change from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic in terms of the art of Göbekli Tepe, for example? I mean, I just see it. There's such a transition, an abrupt change. So not a transition.
I think I think what you have to do is I've tried to divide in my career the rock art into three types. The generic type is it's art, or it's an artistic or symbolic gesture through carving, painting, or whatever. So that's the first stage. The second stage is then to think about it: is it abstract or is it figurative? And again, that creates its own questions. And then the third thing is where it sits within the landscape. And I think if you start to look at Göbekli Tepe and say, for example, the cave art of what we see in Western Europe, Southwestern Europe, such as stuff we see in the Franco-Cantabrian region, I suppose on a basic level, on my first level, it's all there. You're seeing the figurative art, and that it's conveying meanings and messages. It's trying to get beyond that, and I think this is where we have to bring in philosophy, semiotics, phenomenology, hermeneutics, to try and understand what might be going on. And it's not just with modern humans, but also with archaic humans as well, such as Neanderthals, because we are now looking at, as we've already talked about in this discussion, we're now looking at symbols, painted symbols within caves that are not modern human. They are probably Neanderthal in their dates. And I think of El Castillo as a good example of that, of that process. And so some of the things that we were thinking about, and again, going back to my sort of undergraduate days and talking to some of the professors at the time, we've completely turned upside down some of the views that we were thinking about in terms of this relationship between us and artistic symbolic endeavor, and also what is going on with our cousins, our Neanderthal cousins. And I'm still under the impression that one is imposing in a very, very subtle and passive sort of way the idea of producing symbolic art, symbolic behavior, and that is from Neanderthal to modern humans. You heard it here first.
Well, yeah, absolutely, George. Can I perform a neat pivot back to the Paleolithic art with the sculptures? I've always wondered, working on the Lesbug figurine, a lot of the figures were created and then destroyed and buried. I'm told. What is going on there? What are your thoughts about that?
I think that throughout prehistory, and also within modern history, we have times of crisis. And I'll just tell you one thing and you'll get it. Gladiator, the film, and that viewers and listeners will be aware of Gladiator. There's a beautiful scene there whereby one of the gladiators, after I think Maximus has died, gets hold of this small figurine and he buries it.
Okay.
And that is a mark to say in that film that the world, in his view, his mindset has changed, because the leader that they were looking for has now gone. And by burying that figurine, it's for somebody else to find. People like me and you and Seth as archaeologists digging around. And I think that's an important point. I think it's an important point that when we start to see changes in the symbolic record and the artistic record, it's usually through changes in ideology, and also that change in ideology may be crisis driven in that you have to rethink. I mean, there's again, going back to my Neolithic Bronze Age transition, for example, in the second millennium BC, throughout Europe, there's a massive change, whereby we're seeing Neolithic chamber tombs being blocked up, for example, almost as if they don't want anybody to go in there because the ideology has changed. And from that, within a few hundred years, you get the development of cairns and barrows, which are single status monuments, whereas previously in the Neolithic, it had been a corporate monumentality, whereby you're getting more than just one person being buried in that monument. So all through that period, and again, it's a period I've studied quite intensively, you see within the Neolithic, a 2,000-year period, changes in design. And again, putting that into a modern context, just think about the Christian church, which occurs around about sort of 600 AD. We start to get the first certainly in the British Isles, the first pilgrims coming in and trying to convert people to Christianity. And then the big change is in the 18th century, when we start to see nonconformist Methodism, for example, and all the trappings that go with Methodism. So I think we are seeing within, not just in the ideology, but also within the material culture as well. We're going from the very ornate Catholic churches of the pre-Reformation of 1538. After that, they become more and more simplified. The gold and silver is melted down. The stained glass is smashed. We also get that in the English Civil War of the late 17th century. We then get the introduction of nonconformist churches. And then to top it all, we have our architects of the mid-19th century, early 20th century, who completely destroy much of the survival of any medieval wall paintings, etc., etc. There are very, very few examples, in my view, in the British Isles, but what does survive tells us that we were looking at a completely different type of Christianity. Or likewise, in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, we're getting that as well. Any type of change, either through crisis or through ideological change in terms of the religion, sees a change in the material culture, and that includes art. And going back to your original question about figurines and about how that is changing, I think, through crisis. And I dare say, when you start to look at the Venus figurines, for example, which have got a quite clear type date from about 25,000 to about 29,000 BP before present, that, I think, if you started to think about the archaeology, I can't really think of it at the moment, but I dare say there'll be somebody in our audience or someone listening to this will say, yes, between those dates, there was a change in environment. It could be climatic. Right. And I think it probably was climatic, if now I come to think of it, that we're starting to see. And with that change comes crisis. And with that crisis comes the change into thinking about how we produce our sacred endeavor and our ritual endeavor, our artistic endeavor in different ways.
Okay, good answer.
Very well. Well, it's an uninformed answer, but it's what I'm thinking, only because of what I've been experiencing over the last 5 months, traipsing around the Welsh landscape. And I've started to see, really quite significant patterns about how people did express themselves, 2 to 3 to 4, 5 millennia ago, which is, again, it's been a revelation for me, because you do talk about it in lectures, but actually to start to see it time and time again with the way rock art is, where the way rock art is positioned within the landscape, even its orientation is also quite important as well, Peter. So there's definitely this for example, in the passage grave tradition, again, we're looking at, which is quite late within the Neolithic sequence. So we're looking at maybe 3000 BC, where we're seeing a lot of passage graves. If any of our listeners have been to, or people watching us have been to Newgrange, for example, in Ireland, nearly all the passage graves in Ireland have an east-west passage alignment. Lehug B has an east-west passage alignment, which is the site I've just been talking about, which is in Jersey. So it goes right through the Neolithic sequence. There are one or two exceptions, but the orientation does play an important part. And the late Chris Tilley, who I have a lot of admiration for, he talks about the idea of geology, and in the respect of igneous and sedimentary rock, and how that is used in the construction, which I consider to be an art form in terms of architecture. It's all about how you portray your monument and what you do inside your monument. That becomes important. And Tilly had worked out, I was with him, in fact, when we were doing our trips around southern Sweden back in the early 1990s. And there was one particular area there called Västgötaland, which is quite a big inland area, stuffed full of trees, very, very cold. But there are around about 300 plus passage graves. And they're all locally orientated around a mountain called Olleberget. And Chris worked out that all the uprights of the monument were made of sedimentary rock, and all the capstones were igneous. So that tells me the first thing I'm looking at is color. So when you're going into that monument, as the dead, let's talk about metaphor now. As you're going there, if you're dead, you would see, in inverted commas, the color of the sedimentary rock and the igneous rock, and interplay between the minerality in both stones. Some of it would sparkle if it was igneous. The uprights wouldn't sparkle, but there would probably be a sandstone to be red. So these are important. The idea of color symbolism in art, artistic endeavor, in architecture is very, very important indeed. And that's again, it's something which hasn't been discussed that much, only because archaeologists like things to be black and white, so to speak, and to be sort of crisp and clear. And I think the one thing that's missing from the archaeological record, which we have to dip into philosophy and sociology, is the idea of sensory archaeology. What we can see, what we would have seen in prehistory, be it Neanderthal or Neolithic, what we could smell, and what we could hear. And again, some of those experiences are what we experienced in, say, Palata Cave when we went to Andalusia, you and I, at the beginning of the year. And some remarkable sort of experiences there. And you can just imagine, the ambience of that cave and the artists going into that cave, making their mark in all three levels. But also, more importantly, the noises coming from those stalagmite flows, those curtains that were coming down from the ceiling of this cave right at the back, and making those wonderful noises.
Absolutely. Well, there's a little section in Chauvet Cave where you've got beautiful charcoal drawings on either side of a little crevice, and there's a natural spring there which gurgles at in the spring every year. Which brings the whole panel to life. I mean, that's got to have some sort of purpose, meaning, significance. So I quite agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And looking at the time, my dear sirs, I do say
we could go on.
We could go on forever, but we're coming a little closer to our time. I do want to ask Peter, is there anything that you want to say or ask or continue with before we come to the end of our show?
Well, all I'll say is that I have a lot more questions for you both. So we'll have to do that another time.
We will. We can do a follow-up. We can definitely do a follow-up, and we will. I very much look forward to it, and I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great talking to you, learning from you, hearing how you view things, and getting the importance of the spirit and the soul of the artist and not just the scientist, and why it's so important that we look at these two and combine these fields and be human and look at these things from a human perspective and not just the hows and the whys, but together. And I think listening to the two of you talk was an excellent experience, and I hope our audience feels the same, learns a lot, and absolutely enjoys it. And I do think this sets up a wonderful experience that we can have Peter ask myself and George some questions, and we can have a great episode based on that in the future.
Great. Thanks for organizing this, Seth. Nice to see you, George.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Okay.
See you
All right.
soon.
Thank you soon.
All right.
The next episode of the Paleo Post Podcast. Have a great time. Please like, subscribe, and enjoy your weekend.